Okay, before I get to the sun and soil experiment itself, I thought I'd just show you a little trick that I just learned. So we have to enter data for the time, and the time was always jumping by 2 minutes. So I started at 0 and 2 and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the two cells that have the data from 0 to 2 minutes just to show the computer the jump that has to happen. And I'm going to select down enough cells to get all the data entered. And I'm going to let the computer do the work for me as far as entering. And what I found is that you can go to Edit and Fill and then Series, and then down here it already knows that I'm stepping or jumping by 2, so I'm going to have a linear function of just increasing by 2 every time. So when I click on OK, it fills in all the data for me, and that's just kind of cool, especially if you got a lot more data to fill in than that. But anyhow, just going to pause this for a minute. Okay, so what I've done is just create a really rough data table, completely unfinished, but I just needed data to work with, because all I really want to talk to you quickly about is how the graphing is going to be slightly different this time. Because basically we're running two experiments at once. An experiment where you measured time against the soil temperature, and another experiment done exactly at the same time with time against the water temperature. So when we go to the chart wizard this time, we just have to let it know that we're doing something slightly different. So we'll bring up our chart wizard. We're still plotting X data and Y data, independent and dependent variables, a cause and effect. So I want to click on the XY scatter plot. This time I'm going to have the computer connect the data with a nice curved line. If you're not sure what to use, you can always click on these things and read down below exactly what it's going to give you. In this case, I can kind of see what I want. There's data points connected by a curved line, and when I click on it, I can read below that says scatter with data points connected with smooth lines, which is pretty much exactly what I want. Okay, click on next, and the critical step here is clicking on series. And because I have soil data and water data both plotted against time, I'm going to end up with two line graphs. So I need to tell the computer that I need two sets of data, or two series of data sets. So I need to add one, and it makes sense to call the first one soil. And by the way, it's always good to look at the example, because right now none of this makes sense, as it shouldn't, because we haven't given the computer any usable information yet. So now that I've said, well, this is going to be for soil, and I'm giving it a meaningful name, now I can tell it what my X values were. Because time changed, then the temperature changed because of increased time, then the time will be our X, or independent value. So I simply need to drag over and highlight that the X values are the time, and then I check the graph right here, and I see it's going from 0 to 35 minutes. It's giving me a buffer of about 3 minutes here, but that would sufficiently fit in the 0 to 32 minutes of time. Computer's not really intelligent about this, so it's saying, well, do you want Y to always equal 1? Well, no, I don't. The dependent variable was the temperature. As time changed, so changed the temperature, in this case of the soil. So I click in there, I'll delete that value of 1 and tell it, please use these data points for the temperature. And I can see now that the graph is starting to be meaningful to me. Time numbers down here that make sense, temperature numbers that match my data, it's all working great. So I basically have plotted the soil. But again, I want to plot both the soil and the water, so I'm going to click on Add a Series. And the second series is going to be where I plot the time against the water. So I need to name that one as my water. The X value is still the same independent variable. The time changed, then after that the temperature changed. So just click and drag and tell it that these are the numbers, the data that belong for the X value. Again, it's asking me, well, do you want Y to always equal 1? No. That would basically mean that the temperature never changed. It always stayed at 1 degree. So I have to tell the computer what to do, and I'm telling it, use this data right here as my as my dependent variable. Once I have that down, I can see now that they're starting to graph for me the soil and the water. I don't like those colors. I don't like the fact that it's missing any kind of vertical lines up here off the x-axis. There's a lot of work still to do, but this is probably the most important step. I'm going to click through the rest of it pretty quickly here. Under next, I need to give it a title, and I need to label the x-axis and the y-axis. This is time, but I need to tell the units, and this is temperature. I need to also tell the units, so both those need to be filled in. There's really nothing to do under the axes value, although I can play with those a little bit if I want to get more complicated. Grid lines, I think it needs some lines coming up here to help a viewer to understand what each of these points are. Right now, if you tried to follow up to a point, you'd have a really hard time telling exactly what that time was. So maybe click in here and add some major or minor grid lines to help out, but you need to make those decisions for yourself about how it's going to look best. The legend, another name for legend is a key. Right now it's floating to the right, and you need to decide where it's going to be the easiest for your audience to read it. Not for you, not where it looks the best, but where it's easier for someone else to understand what's going on. So make your own decision about where you put that. Data labels really aren't important. If you wanted to give a name, it gets a little cluttered up here if you start saying that all of this is part of the soil data. The key or the legend really tells you that information. And so once you get to that point, we're going to, for now at least, drop it as an object onto this sheet. And there's still a lot of cleaning up to do. I didn't add the X and Y axis labels. I didn't add a title, and I certainly want to get rid of all this gray back here that's just going to waste ink. So I need to work through this and kind of fine-tune everything, but that's the basics of what you have to do.